The clinking of silverware stopped. At the head of the dinner table, my daughter-in-law Sarah looked me dead in the eye. "You have no power here, Helen," she said, her voice like ice. The whole family heard it. My own son, Mark, just stared down at his plate, his silence a blade in my heart. They saw me as a quiet old widow, a guest in the life my late husband and I built. "Friend, before I tell you what I did next, please do me a kindness. Tap subscribe so you can stay with me and see what happens when a good woman is pushed too far." They thought I was a relic from the past, a dusty photograph on the wall. They forgot that I was the one who helped lay the foundation of their entire world. I didn't say a word. I simply folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice steady. I stood up on shaky legs and walked out of the dining room, each step echoing in the sudden heavy silence. I walked into the quiet hallway, pulled out my phone, and found the number I hadn't called in years. I was about to make a single phone call that would remind them what real power was. My thumb pressed the call button. A man's voice answered on the first ring. I kept my own voice low and calm. "It's time," I said. "Please proceed." That was all that was needed. I ended the call and stood there in the hallway, the fancy wallpaper seeming to mock me. I could still hear their muffled voices from the dining room, probably laughing now, thinking they had won. I took a deep breath and started walking back. But before my hand could touch the doorknob, every light in the house went out. The whole mansion was plunged into a deep, shocking darkness. A scream came from the dining room, Sarah's. I heard chairs scraping, confused shouts, and my son Mark yelling, "It's just a power outage, everybody calm down." But I knew better. I stood there alone in the pitch-black hallway, a small, sad smile on my face. It wasn't a power outage, it was a message, and it was only the beginning of the lesson they were about to learn. The next morning, the house was just as dark as it had been the night before. A cold, grey light filtered through the windows. The heating was off, and the air was frigid. I sat in the living room with a thick blanket wrapped around my shoulders, sipping a cup of lukewarm water. Sarah was pacing back and forth, her face a mask of fury. "Why haven't they fixed it yet?" she snapped at my son, Mark. "Did you call them again?" Mark looked tired. "I've called a dozen times. The lines are dead. My cell phone has no service. Nothing is working." Sarah glared at me, sitting there in my chair. My calmness seemed to make her even angrier. "Well, aren't you just enjoying this?" she sneered. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window at the grey sky. She thought my silence was weakness. She couldn't see the resolve growing inside me. She was so busy being angry that she didn't even notice the mail truck pulling up to our long driveway. The mail carrier walked up the path, a small bundle of letters in his hand. Since nothing else was working, this was our only link to the outside world. Mark went to the door and took the mail, shuffling through bills and junk. Then he stopped. He was holding a crisp white envelope. It was from the family bank, and it was addressed to him and Sarah. He tore it open, his brow furrowed in confusion. I watched his face as he read the single sheet of paper inside. I saw the colour drain from his cheeks. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief and panic. He held the letter out with a trembling hand. "Mum, what is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah snatched the letter from him. I already knew what it said. It was a notice from the bank, informing them that their main joint account, the one they used for everything, had been frozen. "What did you do?" Mark asked, his voice breaking. He was standing in front of me, the useless bank letter crumpled in his hand. Sarah stood behind him, her arms crossed, her eyes shooting daggers at me. It was time for the first truth. "That phone call," I said softly. "It wasn't to the power company. It was to Mr. Gable, our family lawyer." Mark's face went from confusion to shock. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I told him to invoke a clause in the family trust," I continued. "A special clause my husband, your father, put in it years ago." I let the words hang in the cold air. It's called the Legacy Protection Clause. It gives me full control of the primary assets if I believe the family's reputation is being put at risk. Mark just stared at me. He finally understood. The power, the phones, the money, it was all me. I wasn't a guest in their house. The house was mine. Sarah's shock quickly turned to pure rage. "She's lost her mind," she hissed at Mark, loud enough for me to hear. "This is proof she's unstable. We can't let her do this." She grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward the kitchen, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She thought I couldn't hear, but in the dead quiet of the powerless house I heard every word. "We have to fight this, Mark," she said urgently. "We'll say she's confused. We'll say she's a danger to herself. We have to get control of the estate back, for her own good." The words were sickening. She wasn't talking about protecting me. She was talking about taking everything from me. I sat there, listening to her plot my demise. She was declaring war. But what she didn't know was that my husband had seen this day coming. He had known that one day I might have to fight for our family, and he had prepared me for it. Sarah worked fast. The very next day, a car pulled up. It was a doctor, an old friend of her family's. Sarah greeted him at the door with a fake, worried smile. "Thank you so much for coming," she said loudly. "We're just so worried about her." She was putting on a show, building her case that I was losing my mind. She had also scheduled an emergency meeting with Mr. Gable, our lawyer, for the following morning. She coached Mark on what to say, how to describe my actions as paranoia. "Just tell them she's not herself," she instructed him. "Tell them she's forgetting things. They'll see we're just trying to help." She was building a trap, using words of love and concern as the bait. She was so sure that her lies would be more powerful than my truth. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Later that afternoon, my old flip phone, which I kept for emergencies, buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, and a hushed voice said, "Helen, it's Susan, from the law office." Susan had been my husband's secretary for 30 years. "I'm not supposed to be doing this," she whispered. "But Sarah's been calling all day. She's trying to have you declared incompetent. Be careful, Helen. She's very convincing." After she hung up, I sat in the silence. Susan's warning confirmed everything. Sarah's words wouldn't be enough. I needed proof. I needed the one thing my husband told me to use only if everything else had failed. I looked at the ceiling, toward the dusty attic. It was time to find his old briefcase. He had called it his final safeguard. I finally knew what he meant. The attic was cold and smelled of old wood and memories. I found his old leather briefcase tucked away in a corner, under a white sheet. My heart ached just seeing it. I ran my hand over the worn leather and clicked open the latches. The sound echoed in the quiet space. Inside, beneath stacks of old company papers and photographs, was a thick, sealed manila envelope. It felt heavy in my hands. Written on the front in my husband's familiar handwriting was a single word: emergency. This was it. This was the final safeguard he had left for me. I held it close to my chest, a final gift from the man I loved. It was a weapon he had left behind for me to use. Tomorrow morning, at the lawyer's office, Sarah was planning to end my life as I knew it. But she had no idea that I was about to use my husband's last words to end her little war. The lawyer's office was tense. Sarah sat next to Mark, holding his hand, playing the part of the devoted, worried wife. She spoke to Mr. Gable in a soft, sad voice. "She's just not the woman she used to be," Sarah said, dabbing at a fake tear. "We're afraid she's going to hurt herself or the family's estate. We need to step in." Mr. Gable looked at me with pity in his eyes. He was starting to believe her. Just as he was about to speak, I placed the sealed envelope on the polished wooden desk. "Before you make a decision," I said calmly, "I think you should read this." Mr. Gable picked it up, opened it, and began to read. His eyes widened. He cleared his throat and read it aloud. It was a notarized letter, signed by my husband. It said that in the event of any family dispute, all power, all control, and all final decisions regarding the entire estate were to be mine, and mine alone. The decision was absolute, final, and not to be questioned. The room fell silent. Sarah's plan had just been demolished. Mark just stared at the document in the lawyer's hand. He saw his father's bold signature at the bottom, and it was like a ghost had entered the room. He wasn't just looking at a piece of paper. He was looking at his father's wisdom from beyond the grave. He saw how his father had protected me, even after he was gone. For the first time, Mark looked at Sarah not as his wife, but as the woman who had just tried to strip his mother of everything. A crack formed in the armor he had built around his heart. He saw her deception, clear as day. He pulled his hand away from hers, a small movement that felt like an earthquake in the silent room. Sarah saw it too. She saw the doubt in her husband's eyes. The fear that flashed across her face was real this time. She had not only lost the legal battle, she was starting to lose her husband. The ride home was cold and silent. As soon as we were back in the dark house, Sarah went straight to her room and slammed the door. I could hear her talking on the phone in frantic, hushed tones. She was calling banks, credit card companies, anyone she could think of. She was trying to find a crack in the wall I had built around our finances. But there were no cracks. My husband had been a brilliant man. The document he left was ironclad. Every call she made ended in failure. "I'm sorry, but we can't authorize that," I heard her repeat, her voice getting higher and more desperate with each call. She was a queen trapped in a castle with no money and no power. She was learning what it felt like to be helpless. She was starting to understand what she had made me feel at that dinner table. Later that day, I saw my son Mark, sitting alone in the dark living room, his head in his hands. He looked lost. All the anger he'd had toward me was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. Sarah was still locked in their room, and the silence between them was heavier than ever. I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Mum," he whispered. I didn't want his apology. I wanted my son back. "Let's go talk," I said softly. "Just you and me. We'll go to that little cafe you used to love. We won't talk about the money. We'll just talk." He looked at me, surprised. It was an olive branch, a chance to reconnect, away from Sarah's influence. He needed to make a choice. Mark hesitated for only a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Mum." The next morning, he had to lie to Sarah for the first time in their marriage. He told her he had an early work meeting he couldn't miss. The look she gave him was suspicious, but she was too consumed by her own problems to question him further. We met at the small, quiet cafe by the town square. It felt strange, almost like we were doing something wrong. We ordered coffee, and for a while we just sat in silence. Then he started to talk. He told me how much pressure he was under, how he felt like he was failing everyone. He told me he had let Sarah handle all their finances for years because he thought she was better at it. "I've been a fool, Mum," he said, his voice thick with regret. He had no idea how right he was. His words stuck with me. I let Sarah handle all the finances. That afternoon, while Mark was at work, I was looking for an old photo album at their house. As I pulled it from a shelf in the study, I accidentally knocked over a large decorative box on the desk. The lid flew off, and a flood of paper spilled across the floor. But it wasn't just paper, it was a pile of unopened envelopes. All of them were stamped in bright red ink with words like "final notice" and "past due." I picked one up. It was a credit card bill for an amount that made my breath catch in my throat. I picked up another and another. It was a mountain of debt. Sarah hadn't just been spending their money. She had been drowning them in secret debt, and my son had no idea. When Mark came home that evening, I was waiting for him in the study. I had laid all the unopened bills out on his desk like a funeral shroud. He walked in, saw the letters, and froze. He walked slowly to the desk and picked up one of the bills. I watched as he read it, his face turning pale. He picked up another and then another, his hands shaking. The perfect life he thought he had was a lie. The beautiful house, the fancy cars, the designer clothes, it was all built on a foundation of debt and deception. "I don't understand," he whispered, looking at the papers, then at me. His voice was filled with a deep, chilling betrayal. He wasn't just looking at bills, he was looking at the wreckage of his marriage. The confrontation was uglier than I could have imagined. When Sarah got home, Mark was waiting for her in the living room with the pile of bills on the coffee table. "What is this, Sarah?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. At first she tried to deny it, then she tried to justify it. "I had to," she cried. "We have an image to maintain, for your career." The argument echoed through the cold, dark house. It was the sound of a marriage breaking apart. I went to my room and closed the door, but I could still hear their angry words. Late that night, I saw Mark go into the guest room with a pillow and a blanket. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. It was the sound of a line being drawn, a chasm opening up between them that might never be closed. This debt was a symptom of a much bigger disease. I needed to know the truth, not just for me, but for Mark. I called Arthur Finney, my late husband's accountant and oldest friend. Arthur was fiercely loyal and incredibly discreet. He had handled our family's finances for over 40 years. "Arthur," I said, "I need a favour. I need you to do a quiet investigation for me. Off the books." I told him about the debt and about Sarah. I asked him to look into every penny she had spent for the last 5 years. I needed to know where the money had really gone. "For you, Helen, anything," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I'll start right away. I'll call you the second I find something." When I hung up, I felt a small bit of hope. The truth was coming. It only took one day. Arthur called back and his voice was grim. "Helen, it's worse than we thought," he said. "The spending on clothes and cars is bad, but that's not the whole story." He paused, and I felt a knot of dread form in my stomach. "I found a series of large, regular wire transfers," he explained. "They're going from a secret account Sarah set up to a shell corporation I've never heard of. It's a lot of money, Helen. Hundreds of thousands of dollars." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just reckless spending anymore, this was calculated. Sarah wasn't just buying things, she was moving money. She was hiding it. But for what? Or for whom a shell corporation? I asked Arthur, my mind racing. "Can you trace it?" He told me he already had. The corporation was registered as a boutique design firm. It was new, only a year old. The name of the company meant nothing to me. But then Arthur told me the name of the firm's co-owner, the person Sarah had been sending all that money to. My hand flew to my mouth. It was a name I hadn't heard in over a decade. It was the name of Sarah's ex-boyfriend from college, a man she had sworn she cut ties with years ago. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The debt, the secret account, the transfers, it was all for him. Sarah hadn't just been lying about money. She had been funding a secret business with another man, right under my son's nose. I hung up the phone, my body trembling. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. The secret business wasn't just a side project. It was an escape plan. Sarah was using our family's money to build a new life with her old flame. Once the business was successful, she would have left Mark with nothing but a mountain of debt and a broken heart. The cruelty of it was staggering. She had been playing a long game, smiling at family dinners while secretly plotting her betrayal. She hadn't just married my son. She had targeted him. His love and trust were just tools for her to use. My heart broke for Mark. This secret was a poison, and I was the one holding it. I had to decide what to do next. For 2 days I lived with this terrible secret. I watched my son walk through the house like a ghost, broken by the revelation of the debt. How could I tell him this? How could I tell him that the woman he loved had never loved him at all? That his entire marriage was a lie? The words would destroy what little was left of him. I sat up all night wrestling with myself. Was it my place to tell him? Maybe it was better to let things fall apart on their own. For a moment, I doubted everything. Maybe turning off the power and freezing the money was wrong. Maybe I should have just stayed quiet. But then I thought of my husband and the legacy he worked his whole life to build. This wasn't just about Mark's heart. It was about protecting our family from those who would see it destroyed. I couldn't tell Mark. I had to show him. My plan began to form. With a little digging, Arthur found out that Sarah's new design firm was a finalist for a local business award. The award ceremony was a fancy gala, and it was just a week away. Sarah and her partner would be there, celebrating their success, a success built on my family's money. I knew this was my chance. It was the perfect time and place to expose the truth, not just to Mark, but to everyone. Sarah loved to keep up appearances. She was obsessed with her public image. So I decided I would let her have her moment in the spotlight. I would let her stand up in front of the whole town, feeling proud and powerful. And then I would bring it all crashing down around her. The night of the gala, I went alone. I made sure to stay in the background, a shadow at the edge of the glittering crowd. I saw Sarah across the room. She was wearing a stunning red dress, holding a glass of champagne, and laughing on the arm of her business partner. She looked radiant, happier than I had ever seen her with my son. As I watched them, my heart filled with a cold, hard anger. They were celebrating a victory paid for with my son's broken trust. They were toasting to a future built on lies. Then, I saw something that made my blood run even colder. I saw the partner lean in and whisper something to Sarah. And then he looked across the room, directly at someone else, and gave a small, secret nod. My eyes followed his gaze. He was looking at a couple standing by the bar. It was Sarah's parents. They smiled and nodded back at him. My whole body went rigid. They knew. Of course they knew. They were in on it. This wasn't just Sarah's plan. This was a family conspiracy. They had pushed their daughter to marry my wealthy son, all with the goal of funneling his family's money into a business that would enrich their own. They were a family of vipers, and they had sunk their fangs into my son. The depth of the betrayal was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just a cheating wife. It was a calculated, cold-blooded attack on my entire family. And I was the only one who could stop them. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text message from Arthur, the accountant. I opened it, my hands shaking with anger. The message was short and brutal. "Helen, I found something else. He's betraying her too." Arthur had discovered that Sarah's partner had set up a second secret company. He was planning to dissolve their shared firm right after the awards, moving all the assets to his new company and cutting Sarah and her family out completely. He had been playing them all from the very beginning. I looked back at Sarah, laughing and clueless, thinking she was on the verge of getting everything she ever wanted. She was about to be betrayed by the one person she had trusted. The irony was almost poetic. Everything was in place. The annual charity dinner for my family's foundation was the very next night. It was the biggest social event of the year. I knew Sarah and her family would be there, eager to cement their new status in the community. I called my son Mark. "I need you to come to the foundation dinner tomorrow night," I told him. "I need you to sit in the front row, and no matter what happens, I need you to trust me." He was confused, but he agreed. The stage was set for the final act. Sarah thought she was the star of the show, but she was just a character in a story that I was about to finish. The ballroom was filled with hundreds of people. I stood at the podium on the stage, looking out at the crowd. I saw Mark in the front row, his face full of concern. I saw Sarah a few tables back, sitting with her parents and her partner, looking smug and triumphant. She gave me a little wave, a mocking gesture. I cleared my throat, and the room fell silent. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and clear. "Tonight, I want to talk about the future of our family's foundation. But to do that, we must first protect it from those who would use it for their own gain." Behind me, a large screen lit up. It showed the foundation's logo, Sarah smiled, thinking I was about to praise her. Her smile was about to disappear forever. To protect our legacy, I continued, we recently conducted a full financial review and we found some disturbing things. The logo on the screen behind me was replaced by a bank statement. It showed the wire transfers from Sarah's secret account. Then it showed the corporate filings for her sham company, with her partner's name clearly visible. Gasps rippled through the room. I laid out the whole ugly story. The debt, the secret business, the conspiracy with her family. I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the facts. Then, for the final blow, the screen showed the filings for the partner's second secret company, proof that he was betraying her too. I looked at Sarah. Her face was ashen. Her perfect world had crumbled to dust in front of everyone. Her partner was staring at her with hatred. Her parents were trying to hide their faces. It was over. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and her family left town, buried under an avalanche of public shame and legal notices. Mark was heartbroken, but for the first time in years, he was free. We started to heal together. We worked side by side at the foundation, rebuilding not just our finances but our family. The house was quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet, not a tense one. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the very end. If you believe that strength isn't about how you fall, but about how you get back up, then please tap subscribe and join our community. You won't want to miss the stories we share next. One evening, I was sitting alone, enjoying the silence, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. I answered and a woman's voice said, "Hello? Is this Helen? I was told you're the person to call when you have a family problem you can't solve."